But first, loyal listener Frank Fisher, also a political blogger, asked us to have a listen to a surprising figure on the 10 o'clock news in March.
The government says incidents of domestic violence have fallen substantially, but it still affects 1 in 4 women. Indeed, for women aged between 15 and 44, it's the biggest cause of mortality.
What was that? Domestic violence kills more women between 15 and 44 than anything else. You might think that the 10 o'clock news would check such a striking number, but in fairness, they aren't the only ones. The Kent police made a very similar claim, that domestic violence was the leading cause of death for women between 19 and 44. The Guardian has said that globally, violence against women, not just domestic violence, was the leading cause of death for 15 to 44-year-olds. This claim mutates as it circulates. A milder strain claims that domestic violence is the leading cause of morbidity in women aged 15 to 44. Just a reminder, mortality means death, morbidity means ill health. This milder strain has appeared in a number of official publications, most notably a 2005 Home Office document called Domestic Violence, a National Review. It's subsequently been asserted by the Home Affairs Select Committee, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Ministry of Justice, and others. It's pretty common for a rogue statistic to spread and mutate like this, and the likely explanation is that people keep misquoting each other rather than going to a credible original source. That was what we did. We trawled through figures from the Office for National Statistics, and it's clear that for England and Wales, the 10 o'clock news statistic is, thankfully, completely wrong. In the year 2007, nearly 6,000 women aged between 15 and 44 died. What you claim as the largest cause of death depends on how broad your categories are, but over 2,000 of those deaths were from cancer and other tumours. 1,100 women were killed by external causes, which would include domestic violence, but also includes other assaults, suicides, and all kinds of accidents. It seems as though the BBC 10 o'clock news and others have simply confused mortality and morbidity. It's an open and shut case. But there's more to the story than that. What about the global figures? And does the morbidity claim hold water? We asked Colin Mathers, the man in charge of statistics on death and the burden of disease at the World Health Organization. I asked him what the leading cause of death is globally in women aged 15 to 44.
Well, for the world as a whole, it is HIV/AIDS is the leading cause of death in that age group, followed by tuberculosis and then suicide.
And do we know how many deaths are due to domestic violence? Or is that not a category that the WHO collect?
We do collect information on homicide, and domestic violence leading directly to death from an injury would be classified as homicide, and so it was part of that. There is no doubt that there are studies that show that a considerable proportion of homicides in women in this age range are committed by intimate partners.
But is homicide, just taken as a standalone category, is that a major cause of death?
It's not in the 10 leading causes globally, or I've pulled out numbers for Britain. It's not in the top 5 for Britain. Suicide is the second leading cause in Britain in this age group. A proportion of suicides would probably be the result of domestic violence.
What are the numbers on morbidity? What's the leading cause of morbidity globally?
We use a measure called the DALY, which essentially is quantifying lost years of healthy life.
So disability-adjusted life years?
That's right. And so somebody who has a mild joint problem might be considered to have lost a small fraction of a healthy year of life for each year they live. Somebody who has dementia or blindness or paraplegia would be considered to have lost the equivalent of a much larger fraction of their year of life. In terms of that loss of healthy years of life, at a global level, depression is the leading cause of lost healthy life in women aged 15 to 44. That's followed by schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So 3 mental disorders are responsible for the most lost of healthy years of life from the non-fatal conditions. If you add up the lost years from people dying as well, then the rankings obviously will be different.
Is there any way to do these sums that makes it credible to say that domestic violence is the leading cause of morbidity in women aged 15 to 44?
Domestic violence is certainly a significant risk factor, one of the contributors to loss of health, but I doubt very much it'll be the leading one. At a global level, at least, unsafe sex is probably going to be the leading risk factor in this group because HIV/AIDS is up there as the leading cause of death.
Colin Mathers of the WHO. So where did this statistic come from? Since the Home Office confidently asserted it in the ministerial foreword to their 2005 document, Domestic Violence, a National Review, we asked them where they got it from. They gave us a statement in which they said the statistic was used for illustrative purposes. Now there's some fine print for you. They also pointed us to the World Bank's World Development Report for 1993. But even the World Bank's 1993 research shows domestic violence and rape in sixth place as a source of morbidity. So it seems that from that original claim in 1993, there have been multiple bouts of statistical inflation. The 1993 table showed rape and domestic violence as the sixth largest cause of morbidity in women aged 15 to 44 globally. Leaving to one side the difficulties in collecting that statistic, morbidity then mutated into mortality. Global figures were used in the UK without any mention that there were global figures, rape was dropped from the category without making any adjustments, and the whole lot was booted up the league table from sixth place to first place. Thank goodness for illustrative purposes, otherwise I'd be worried that a bogus statistic had echoed around the world, copied apparently without question into official reports, news bulletins and policy documents. And of course, there's another very important question. How serious is the problem of domestic violence? I spoke to Professor Sylvia Walby of Lancaster University, who's been working on the problem of improving the statistics both in the UK and across the world. I asked her how the data was collected in the UK.
It's collected with great difficulty. It should be collected in the official criminal statistics, but that's very difficult because there isn't an official crime code for domestic violence. So it has to be pieced together in a very awkward kind of way.
So you have assault, murder, but you don't have domestic violence? That's
right. So you have to rely upon additional coding by the police to say that the incident was domestic. Otherwise you don't know whether the assault was by a man on another man in the street or whether it was a domestic incident. So that's quite awkward. But the police are beginning to collect those figures, but they're not yet properly in the public domain, which is very disappointing. The other way of collecting the figures is to do a survey, and you ask people what's happened to them in the last year, have they suffered any crimes? And we now have within the British Crime Survey a set of specialised questions on domestic violence, which now get asked every year. The first time they were asked in quite a lot of detail, but now they ask only a very small subset of those, so again we have quite limited information.
Why has that part of the survey been pared down?
It's said because it's too expensive to ask the longer set of questions. But of course that's simply a matter of priorities. How much money do we want to invest in knowing exactly how much of this violence there is?
So to the extent that we have numbers we can rely on, what do they say?
Well, the best data does come from the surveys, from the British Crime Survey. And then it depends what threshold measure of domestic violence that we use. The conventional way is to say it's about 4% of women in any year will suffer domestic violence. If you take a more restrictive definition, which involves actually physical force, then it's down to 3.4%.
Some of the people that we've talked to in the course of doing this piece have suggested that we shouldn't be questioning this rogue statistic. Even though it isn't true, we shouldn't be questioning it because domestic violence is such a serious problem. Do you have sympathy with that view?
I understand the view. It is difficult to be critical of something on such an important area. But I think we've gone beyond the basics. Everybody now knows that domestic violence is a serious problem. And now we need to know exactly the scale and shape of that problem. So we do need to be querying the figures, but we do need to be improving them. And that means collecting new and better data.
Sylvia Walby. You're listening to More or Less with me, Tim Harford.